It's kind of like you go out on a date, and as you're driving home, all of a sudden you say, oh, I should have asked him this question. And then because you find your time and your youth and your energy and your future important, and you know that human beings oftentimes forget things, you write the question down so you don't forget, so next time you see him, you ask the question. So you have children? So imagine when he was 2, or maybe 5, or maybe 10, or even now at the age of 26. And sometimes you look at your son and you say, what a loser. Well, is there a right or a wrong life? Well, people do what they need to do where they are in life. In other words, a 2-year-old has no choice but to scream. A 20-year-old hopefully will not scream, but maybe will write his ideas down. A 40-year-old will kind of just mind his own business and say, this too shall pass. Is there a right and a wrong? Well, really no, because where you are ultimately determines how you're going to express yourself. But as a mother, as someone who's been seasoned by life, pushed around by life, knows a few things about money, about relationships, about energy, about youth, about time, you look at your son and you say, don't waste time. And your son may look at you and say, Mom, there is no good or right approach to time. I'm just living life. And you say, son, listen, I know you're living life, but where this life is going to take you is in the gutter, or maybe paradise, who the hell knows? So for your son, there are no right or wrong answers. He's just living out his life. For you, who's been there, who's done that, and you have kind of suffered some consequences because of perhaps lack of information, knowledge, experience, you kind of look at your son and you impose the wrath of motherhood upon him. So when I read a question that comes from the psyche or a mind of an 18-year-old who doesn't read very much, who doesn't think very much, whose life is just up in the air, is that question good for the 20-year-old? Yeah, for the 20-year-old it is. But when I read it, does it make sense to me? No. Is it meaningful? No. Is it subjective? Yeah. Am I biased? Yeah. I mean, does your son call you biased in regards to certain judgments that you have on him? Absolutely. Are those educated biases? Yeah, they're actually life-saving. They come out of a good amount of reflection, experience, and observation, yeah. You know, I think we occupy 3, 4, 5 different stages in life. And you could be 18 and you could occupy a higher level. You could be 45 and you could occupy a lower level. So let me give you a couple of examples. Imagine you were kicked out of your house and you have no place to live. And so your question is going to revolve around, is there a place I can stay the night? That question is very practical. That question is something you can see and touch and taste, you know, in a very intimate way. You go home and your companion screams at you and you want to know the reasons. And so you kind of look at him or you hear her say, what is wrong with you? Let's sit and talk. You take a nap, you wake up from the nap, and all of a sudden you feel as if your life doesn't mean anything. You don't mean anything. Everything you've done in your life doesn't mean anything. And then you say, well, what am I doing? And if you look at these 3 or 4 or 5 different questions, you realize they stand at different levels in life. There are certain questions that you actually know why they came about, how they came about, where you need to go to kind of figure out what the answers are. It's something that some 3,000 years ago, someone like Socrates has mentioned, which is, if you want milk, for example, if you open the fridge and you open a box of cereal and you want to have Cheerios with some milk, you open the fridge and you realize you don't have milk. And you say to yourself, where can I go to get some milk? But there is 7-Eleven, there's the Shell gas station, there is Safeway, there is Costco. Or maybe you'll come to realize that, well, you have no clean clothes. There is a closet laundromat. Then you get to a place in life where you say, I wonder what I need to do with my life. And these are questions that you can't find the answers at Safeway. Not even coming to Lanier, UC Berkeley, or Stanford. These are what we call existential questions. Now, I'm not quite sure how we get to the existential questions. I mean, one of the nice things about just being us is for the first 50, 60, 70 years of your life and my life, we ask ridiculous, cheesy questions. I mean, they're important questions. I mean, a couple of months, someone in this class is going to give birth to a brand new baby. Healthcare, that's a good question. Diapers, great questions. You know, can I live in a studio still or should I move into a 2-bedroom? Great question. What sort of a neighborhood do I want to raise my kid? Another great question. Do I need a stable job to create a stable life for my newborn? Another great question. How do I raise my kid so that he could become a Malcolm X or a Mahatma Gandhi or a Jesus Christ? That's a completely different question. And that question is going to be very, very difficult to find the answer to. And what usually happens is, if you're asked, the more profound and in-depth your question is, what usually happens to us is that you go back to the things you're familiar with. Okay? It's kind of like the abusive relationship. You don't really know what to do with being alone. You don't really know what to do with being, depressed to some extent, sad. So what you do is you call back the person who abused you, or who is just no good for your life. Because, well, loneliness is just too much. Depression is just too much. At least when you're with someone who abuses you, you know who the villain is. So as you move up into your own, I suppose, psychological maturity, you're less able to access the root of the question. And other people are able to answer you either. So you'll experience more loneliness, I suppose, to some extent. If I was to give you a different example, there was this very young, attractive woman who used to come to our car wash. This is like 40 years ago. And she would always complain that there are no good men. And 40 years ago, people were different than they are today. It took her about 30 or 40 years to come to realize that most of the men who walked into her life were actually quite decent. She was the rotten apple. And once she figured this out, she packed her stuff and moved back home to Iran. She realized that that's the only place she can go where she can be a bit more digestible for other people. But it took her some time. Men are not really good at this, and most women aren't, but some are really good. Women who walk away from a long-term relationship, if and when they're very, very devastated, they have a tendency of locking themselves up in this psychological cave. They just sit there, depressed. They want to figure out why this happened to them. And women have an expiration date, unlike men, especially in a youth culture such as this, where your looks matter, your age matters, everything about who and what you are matters, right? And add to the fact that biologically, there is a certain limit, a point you can just live your life before your body screams for a child, and you may not really be able to have a child after a certain age, so there's an expiration date. So when a woman has injected a good amount of hope and dreams in a relationship that doesn't pan out the way she wants it to, she has a tendency going somewhere dark into herself to try to examine her life, the sort of mistakes she's made. And then she won't date for a long, long time. When she comes out, she is ready. And then for the first time, she's able to ask all the right questions when she's on a date, about the guy's parents, about his education, about his money, all that stuff. These are things that she couldn't have done at the age of 18 or 19 or 25 or 30. And if your question next is, well, how can one learn to ask those questions at the age of 18 as opposed to 40? I have no idea. I think all of us have to be beaten up by life a few times to be able to get to a place where we can ask right questions. And you can't get them from books. And you can't get them by going to school. And you can't get them by going to therapy. I think the saying that you have in one of the Gospels is very accurate, that you can't make the grass grow by pulling it. Some things about human psyche just has to come out organically.